So now we're going to talk about variable scope. And what is variable scope? Well, we have code that's in a function, right? Variables inside the function. And this basically, whatever we do is not supposed to affect the outside world. And we talked about call by value, where you pass a copy in, and then we have call by reference, which is like there's this little tiny doorway to one thing out here that you can mess with through the little doorway. So that's what scope is. Scope is we're going to hide stuff, or we're going to let this like leak out, right? But in general, what it really means is the things inside of a function do not leak out. There's no mixing. You can choose the variable names the same, and there's no mixing, right? And so in this case, we have this function. The normal case is it's fully isolated, right? We're not even passing a parameter in here. So this val is not really the same as this val. There is a val out here, and inside here, there's also a val. These are not the same thing. They're not the same thing. This one is living inside it. It's namespaced. It's the val within the function. Trizap is the way to think about this. And this is the val that is in the global context. It's the global, this is a big script, the outer val, and then the inner val. So we make a wall, big wall. Nobody sneaks through the wall. And of course, oh yeah, superglobals, right? $get sneaks through the wall. If it's the $get, or $post, or $session, which we will learn about later, they're called superglobals. But let's ignore that for the moment. And of course, once I draw you a picture of a wall that cannot be penetrated, now I say, oh, here's how you get out. So how to escape the wall. So the way you escape the wall is using global. Global says, open a door and go find me outside, making, if necessary, that variable name val. So out here we got this val 10. We stick 10 in. We say global. So now val is really just an alias to that val. The name's got to be the same because it's matching based on the name. Go find me the variable name val outside of me, right? Go to the global one. And now if I set it to 100, it's 100. Come back, print out 100 because it pulls this out. Okay? Really simple. Break the little wall. The wall is really solid except for this one doorway that we put in, and poof, we sneak out. Now, be careful. Last thing you want to do is a lot of global variables, especially with funky names, especially a variable named val or a $I variable, because you might be in a loop on the outside and I might be going up, and you global I, and you can blow the loop up. You can mess it up. You can mess up code that you're supposed to be serving as a function, and yet you mess it up because you're messing with the variables that the outer code is using. So this is supposed to be very rarely done, right? And so if I create a global variable, that I tend to avoid it at all costs. You know, if you can pass it in by a parameter, passing it back by return value, these are like the two happiest things, and they make every programmer happy. If you can make a function that takes in copy by value parameters and passes a return value, that's like a pure function that has no side effects. You can see, read about. So if you have a no side effects function, that's like ideal. That everything inside the function, the contract with the outside world is in goes the parameters, but you can't change them, and out go the return. Nice. Passing a variable by reference, well, that's okay. But, you know, if you can avoid that, this is the best. These two things are ideal. Passing a reference is okay. In PHP, it's okay, more okay than other languages. And so global variables are like your last resort. Like, I gotta have a global variable. And then what I suggest, and what most people do, is use long names, because you don't want to inadvertently collide with somebody that just happens to be using your code. Now, maybe you're communicating and you're saying, hey, I'll set this global variable when my function's all done, and you can grab it. And so these are example variables that I've created for the code that does your autograders. Last OAuth body base string. Sometimes I make them really long with camel case. Sometimes I like them really long with uppercase snake case. Camel case is the first word is capitalized. Snake case is this, where it all stays lowercase. In this case, this is uppercase snake case. But I use these long names with nice, unique prefixes because hopefully it also emphasizes to me that I'm not supposed to use them, and it reduces the chance of collision because there is only one namespace for global variables. Another thing interesting about PHP is that PHP evolves over time. And I mentioned, PHP 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, remember 6 doesn't exist. There's a lot that's changed over the years. Like object-oriented came in 5 and null coalescing came in 7. And so there are things that only exist in later versions of PHP. If you want to write code that runs on these earlier versions, you have to come up with something that deals with that. If function exists, array combine, this returns a true false. You pass a string with the name of the function and you can ask. And it allows your code to evolve and cope with different environments. And sometimes you don't have everything installed of PHP, and so you can check to see if your particular instance of PHP has a function that is an optional thing. So there's core stuff and optional things. If you've installed one of our MAMP or XAMPP distributions, you'll find that you get a lot of the optional stuff, and so you don't worry so much about this. Although you'll move into production and be like, oh, where did all these things go? And they're like, well, we didn't put those things in, so you have to find ways to work around. So function exists is a way for you to write code that's smart enough to declare. Now, sometimes what you'd say is like if array combine doesn't exist in the version, you can actually go to Stack Overflow and say, could you give me a pure PHP implementation of array combine? So the thing you'll do is you'll check to see if array combine doesn't exist in your PHP. And if it does, you'll actually put function that says in this not exist, right? You'd actually define the function here. So that's a way. You can't define the function if it's already there, and that would cause an error. So you just say, if this function is not already here, then add this function, which is a way for you to be backwards compatible or sometimes forwards compatible. Sometimes they take things out, and then you can say, oh, wow, it doesn't exist, so I'm going to write this, or I'm going to set a variable so I do it differently, etc. And one of the things that they're very good and very consistent about in the PHP documentation is telling you which versions this PHP works in. So this array keys exists was clearly introduced in PHP 4.0.7. So it's there, and then PHP 5 and PHP 7. Remember, 6 is the magical release that doesn't exist for PHP. And so you want to use this, you can check to see if it doesn't exist, and if not, you could write your own little simple version of it. And you could probably say, Stack Overflow, array, give me a pure PHP version of array key exists for earlier than PHP 4. Now, PHP 4 is pretty darn old, so you're probably not going to run into PHP 4. But you will run into, for some time, even though PHP 7's been out for a while and it's awesome, you will still run into PHP 5 systems for a very, very long time. Now, one of the things that I mentioned is that PHP is like super configurable and has lots of capabilities that can be optionally plugged in. And sometimes you actually have to figure out what is in your PHP installation. Call the system administrator, say, hey, what's going on? But it turns out PHP has a really cool built-in way to dump this stuff for you. So you write one file, I often call this file info.php, and you put the exact 3 lines in it, and this is a function that's built into PHP that dumps the configuration of a particular. So you could run this on your laptop, you could run this on your server, you could run it somewhere else, and you can figure out what version it is, how it's configured, where it stores its log files, etc., etc., etc. And we will be looking at this. If you're using MAMP or XAMPP, there's usually a button called PHP Info that just shows you this stuff, which is quite nice because it's important to figure out what's in there because there's lots of things that are plugged in. This is why I recommend XAMPP and MAMP, because they put a ton of stuff into them so you can, you don't have to go oh, I'm missing something. So that's nice because they choose all that stuff. And so this is what the output of that looks like, and it's page upon page of configuration dump of where this is at, what the configuration setting is, what's been compiled into PHP, because it's so darn flexible. So next we're going to talk about how you take an application, the web pages, and move them into multiple files for common elements that occur on many pages.